Welcome to Sizzle Fantasy Sports, the channel with the most sizzling hot fantasy takes and analysis, presented by your host, Gavin.
Rodgers clean pocket, throws the middle to Gibson, Devontae, touchdown, and a dagger!
What's going on, and happy Thursday, or whatever day it is when you're tuning into this mock draft. My name is Gavin, and today, as requested a couple weeks back, we're going to be picking with the 5th overall selection in today's draft. Remember, if you have a certain position you want to see me draft out of here on the channel, put that down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you. I'll put it on the list, and we'll move along with things here. So next week's wide open. If you want your draft position to be featured in next week's video, put that down in the comment section. Like I said, I'll get back to you. I'll put it on a schedule, and we'll get something working out for you. But today, we've got a full PPR mock draft, 12 teams. We're going to chop off 2 rounds. We've been going about 19, 20 rounds, and we're going to go through 17 today. But if you're new around here to the channel, make sure to go down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode, and you're always notified whenever I put out a new piece of content for you all. Also, go check out those social medias in the top left-hand corner of the screen, and let's get into today's video. Alrighty, as mentioned, we're going to be drafting with that 1.5 draft position here. So right off the board in a full PPR mock, we see 4 straight running backs come off the board here. Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara. Of course, if you've been around here on the channel for a while now, you know that Dalvin Cook is actually my RB1 here. So that's probably who I would have ended up going with here at that 1.01 spot. And regardless, I probably would have rather taken a Christian McCaffrey or an Alvin Kamara in a PPR league over a Derrick Henry. But nonetheless, so another thing I wanted to mention before I get into this draft pick here actually is, remember, you can go down into the description of this video and you can get free access for a limited time to the SFS Discord channel. You'll be able to ask me personalized fantasy football questions whenever you may want to do so and whenever the need for that might arise. And you're going to be able to go in there, join SFS community leagues, and get access to joining those who are also here with you on the channel, taking my fantasy advice and looking for help here, or just to have an interactive fantasy discussion and just chat with others in the fantasy football world. So it's a really good experience. It's something I want to grow upon here and get growing. So if you want to be a part of the building blocks of that phase of the SFS brand and what we do here, make sure to go down in the description, join that right now for a limited time. It is free of cost once again. So at this 1.5 spot here, I've got some really nice options. Davante Adams, namely Saquon Barkley and Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor. And those are probably the only 3 or 4 players I'm thinking about at this draft spot. But as I touched on in a video previously this week, Saquon Barkley is a player who I was very skeptical of, but the more research I did, the more I dove into this topic, the more and more comfortable I feel with taking Saquon Barkley, and the higher and higher the upside and the return on investment I expect it to be. So I love Nick Chubb. I love Jonathan Taylor. Those are studs. They have really good running attacks. They play for run-first football teams, and those guys get after it. They run the ball with physicality, and they have explosive playability in the open field, which is something so critical for guys that we don't think of as receiving back first type players. So nonetheless, though, Saquon Barkley, he's the closest thing that we've seen to Adrian Peterson in the last decade. Every single play, he is a threat to score the football every time he touches the rock. And there's not another player that I think that we can say that about. Maybe Dalvin Cook, maybe Derrick Henry, but not even so to the same extent as Saquon. He looks like he is a level higher than everyone else on the football field when he touches the ball. And the things that he does are just plain and simple exceptional. He's a guy who can catch the ball as well, and obviously he is a very pure rusher and a player that gets major work done in the running game. But he can also handle workload as a receiver, and like I said, if you get him out in space, it's very, very dangerous for opposing defenses. So looking at the board here, immediately I'm seeing something that makes me want to smash the draft button instantly here, and that's the fact that Cam Akers is on the board here at the 2.8 spot. These are 2 incredibly high upside running backs that I honestly can't believe. This is a full PPR mock draft, so the average draft position right now is reflecting that. Obviously, receivers and even Travis Kelce, you see there, are being valued over the running back position at this spot. But I think it's crazy even that Austin Eckler or a Joe Mixon might go before a Cam Akers just because of how high his upside is. I've actually answered some questions about this recently, and between that group of 4 running backs, I've rated them Aaron Jones 1, Cam Akers 2, Mixon, and then Eckler. And it's simply Aaron Jones has the safest feel of the group to me. That's why we see him go at the back end of the first round there. And then Cam Akers after that has an even higher upside than Aaron Jones, but a bit more risk associated with him, I would argue, at least, just because of some frequent injury dings and that we've seen against him during the past season, and then the fact that he just hasn't consistently shown us over a large sample size that he can be that workhorse rusher, although he was given the opportunity for about 4 or 5 weeks at the end of last season. So Cam Akers here is my draft pick. I really like going Calvin Ridley here or Justin Jefferson. Those are really, really intriguing players, but when I have 2 running backs on my roster who I'm going to put this out there right now, quite legitimately, either of these players could be the RB1 next season. I'm not saying that's going to be the case. They're going to have to play a full, healthy 17 or 16 game schedule this year. I believe, what are we in, 18 weeks with 17 games when you factor in that bye week. Nonetheless, Cam Akers is too good to pass on here at this 2.8 position. Getting myself loaded up with 2 running backs here at the top of the board that can have a major impact for my fantasy team. And there he is. You know, I really am tempted, and this is something I have advised other fantasy players against doing this season. I'm tempted to go triple running back here, and this is a strategy that I have validated for the top of the board. If you're picking between the 1.1 and the 1.4 spots, I tend to not hate on the strategy so much because you can get one of those elite top-end players that we know is a slam dunk at the running back position and then pair it with 2 high upside RB2s even on the back end of that draft board, and that's what you see there with a DeAndre Swift and a Najee Harris, although Swift has been getting some more and more risk associated with his game over the past few weeks because of the Lions situation and the players they're bringing in to potentially sign from the free agency market. But nonetheless here, Antonio Gibson here is a player that I'm really, really pressed to pick because Ron Rivera said he wants him more involved in the passing game. He expects a jump from him this season. He expects major production. And what I saw last season out of Antonio Gibson before that foot injury was really, really good stuff. He was a very effective receiving back. He was getting enough done in the run game for me to feel confident in the play style that he possessed. And then we want to add on to that this year is what Coach Rivera is saying. So that's something that is really intriguing to me. Like I said, high upside RB2 right here, borderline RB1. He'll have weeks for sure where he puts up RB1 numbers, especially with just considering the division matchups he has. He's going to have the opportunity to produce and score points against the NFC East opponents. But Justin Jefferson here as my wide receiver 1 is really tough to pass on. There are some other names. Keenan Allen's another player I would love to think about here, but I think that's just too much value to pass on Justin Jefferson at this spot. These sophomore players are really going to be the driving force in fantasy football this year, even some of those year 3 players, but these are the young guys. They've got lots of juice. They're ready to produce, put up those numbers, and that's what we're all about here in fantasy football. We're looking for the guys that can give us the best stat line. Maybe some more talented players aren't giving us the numbers that we're looking for at these positions, but man, oh man, can some of these guys in good situations give us some very, very nice fantasy weeks. And Justin Jefferson clearly is not lacking in the talent department. We saw how good he was at running routes last season and all the things that he was able to do after the catch and the things he also did to separate himself before the catch point were honestly just as impressive as well. So there's a lot of options again here at the back end of the 4th round. I do have the option of dipping into the tight end market with the Mark Andrews here. I think I'm going to pass on that route. Kyle Pitts looks like he's also being highly valued here. Or I could go Josh Allen or Russell Wilson and solidify top-end quarterback play on my team. And that's a position I think I might end up going with here. So I've already got 2 top-end running back performers. The wide receiver market is extremely deep, and I've already got myself my high upside wide receiver 1. I do love the idea of a Jamar Chase. I've talked about him. I see him being a player this year who finishes as a top 24 player. I just think he's going to be north of 1,000 yards, considering the fact that he's reuniting with a college quarterback, considering the fact that he's a top 5 draft pick, how much talent this player has, and everything he does well to be a prototypical X wide receiver. But I think at this spot, Josh Allen is a player that best suits my team because I just got myself 4 players with top end upside at their positions. All 4 of these players, I'm not saying they will. That's a lofty statement. They all have the potential of potentially finishing as the number 1 fantasy producer in their respective positions. So Justin Jefferson is absolutely, if he's healthy, he's going to be a top 12 guy. Cam Akers, he's got a massive ceiling. And that Sean McVay offense, it was so annoying last season seeing what he could be all year long. He would tease us, he would show us flashes of Akers, and then he'd pull him back away and deploy Malcolm Brown, and it was the worst thing ever, right? But this season, it's the Cam Akers show. He's going to have a ton of volume, a ton of workload. If he stays healthy, the sky's the limit for him. Saquon Barkley coming off in the injury. There's some risk there. Some people aren't going to like it, but I think that he's going to be all the better this season. The Giants have diversified that offense. You can't stack the box against the Giants anymore. There's a lot of things that he's got going for him on top of that freakishly athletic talent that he already possesses just as a raw player. And then Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, Gabriel Davis, and his legs. He is the goal line back for the Buffalo Bills. He's got a massive arm. He's going to hit some huge plays again this season. Probably going to be in the MVP discussion once again. Josh Allen's a player who's probably a top 5 guy at the quarterback spot. And when you add in that rushing value that I think a lot of people don't factor into his fantasy production, because you look at Josh Allen as a guy with a massive arm, that's where you start to get added value here, and that's where you start to have him separate himself from the rest of the group. Now, something that's a bit concerning to me is that Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson are sitting down here still at the 67 and 68th ADP spot, and this makes me think that maybe I could have invested elsewhere with that past draft pick, but I wouldn't have rather had Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, Noah Fant, Robert Woods, or Tyler Lockett than them in the spot. Maybe a Jamar Chase is intriguing to me, but I don't really think that those players are setting you too far ahead of the ball here with regards to that draft pick. So mid-5th round here, just before the halfway point in the 5th, I've got the option of a Devontae Smith. I could go here with a CeeDee Lamb. It's kind of crazy to me that some of these players, I know that Devontae Smith's in a better situation to put up fantasy numbers, and I've talked about him as, he's a potential league winner. This is a rookie receiver that you're getting at a discounted price in theory that could walk in and day one be a wide receiver one for that team. But it's just kind of surreal to me to see some of these guys just soaring up draft boards. Finally, here we're seeing Trey Sermon move up draft boards. Michael Carter, I think, is still being a bit overvalued. But I've only got about 20 seconds left here. I really love the idea of a TJ Hawkinson here. He's supposed to go right in this range of players. That's another guy who I think is the top 5 performer at his position. I don't care that Noah Fant is in theory higher on the ADP boards. We're gonna have to go with Hawk here because I'm running out of time. A little bit of a tight end run there in the mid-5th. I think that's fine. I think that the tight end position is becoming more and more fantasy relevant and more viable to take at higher spots. And I absolutely wouldn't advocate to overreach on a tight end, but I think there is starting to arise a situation where, the player I was most considering taking ahead of TJ Hawkinson was Brandon Ayuk down here, and he's still on the board. So I don't feel like I missed out on an opportunity, and I feel like had I not taken TJ Hawkinson, he wouldn't have been here with this pick. So go out there and get your guys in fantasy football. Don't sit around and wait for the player with the proper ADP to fall to you. That's just what the rest of teams are doing. You can't just align yourself with the rest of the fantasy football community if you're going to go out there and eventually try and win your fantasy leagues. Everyone's going to have a slightly altered strategy. Everyone's going to have their own spin on things, but try and do what other players are not. Try and find where you can get the extra advantage and separate yourself. And that's what I'm trying to do with this team here. So remember, this was actually a requested draft position by a subscriber here, that 1.5 spot. I love how my team looks right now. I've got, once again, TJ Hawkinson's another player who I expect to be in the top 5 finishers of players at his position in fantasy, and we snatched him up in the mid-5th round. So that top 2 RB duo is deadly. Justin Jefferson is one of the most talented young receivers in the league, and Josh Allen is going to be an MVP candidate this year as long as nothing drastic happens. And then right here, I've got plenty of wide receiver options to go out and lock up that number 2 spot. Jefferson's a super high upside player. I really like CeeDee Lamb. I'm not the biggest Juju Smith-Schuster player because that's a crowded wide receiver room, and Big Ben, I have my question marks about him. I'm not sure if I love going Adam Thielen here and double dipping onto the same roster for drafting him for that sake. So I'm going to go with Brandon Ayuk here. And, I could go Deontay Johnson. That's another one. He was super high up there in targets last season. But Ayuk, I think, is the best player for the job at this moment while I'm recording this video. He's one of the safer wide receiver prospects out there. I've talked about this numerous times, but Brandon Ayuk coming into the 2021 season, I have similar expectations for him that I had for Deebo Samuel coming into last year, although Deebo Samuel was recovering from a broken foot. So Brandon Ayuk is a very dynamic player. He's a guy who gets it done in the passing game and is even used as a rusher in that Kyle Shanahan offense, and they use him on jet sweeps. They get him out in space, and what he can do in space is really impressive. One of his best highlights from his rookie season was him hurling over defenders into the end zone in a hurdle effort to score a touchdown. So Ayuk's a very talented player, and he ended the season on an absolute tear. He was one of the most consistent and one of the most high upside finishers in the league last year before he had his little minor injury to finish the season off. So Ayuk's a guy I'm all in this year. I'm all in on this year, And now we're looking at flex and bench spots. So we've got, 9 rounds left to go in today's mock draft. Chase Claypool still on there as an option. He's probably going to score some nice touchdowns this season. Jalen Waddle, and not a guy I'm too excited about for redraft purposes. I just think that with the presence of Will Fuller on that football team, along with the fact that he's not going to be a high volume player, I think there's some major reason to have a risk and drawback when drafting him this season. It's probably smart to go out here and try and invest once more into the running back market before it's far too late here. Mike Davis might be a nice pickup, but I could probably wait a round or two on him. Javonte Williams is probably a player that's going to end up popping late in the season. The wide receiver market is where the value is at right now. This is where I can get players who can start in my lineup for me. At this point, I still need to fill out some flex positions in my starting lineup, so I think it's a better investment here to go out and address those needs before addressing a bench running back spot, because I don't think that these potential flex running backs give me as much boost and as much juice in that starting lineup, which is where they would be expected to play based off of how this is turning out. So I'm thinking right now between Higgins, Claypool, and Cooks. Higgins, the one thing that makes me back off a bit is how bullish I am on Jamar Chase, and while it's certainly possible to have multiple productive fantasy players in one offense, even at the same position, I just don't know how much I love to see that, especially with some other things taken into account, like Joe Burrow's injury, how consistent or how long will it take him to get things rolling. It is the Bengals after all. Although I do expect them to have some really nice fantasy producers for this season. The clock's ticking down here. I think I'm going to end up having to go with Chase Claypool. I really debated internally between him and Brandon Cooks, and I doubt Cooks will be available for me on the back end of this swing here. But Claypool gives me something that Cooks doesn't, and that's a presence in the red zone. I've seen Chase Claypool as a rookie come out there and have extremely long and explosive plays at the wide receiver position. He's stretched the field. He's made catches, contested catches at that, and he's done everything you've asked a wide receiver one to do. And I think that of all the receivers on that football team, he has the build most comparable to a true X wide receiver, which is something that can absolutely never hurt your fantasy production, because that means you're probably the player most likely to command targets in that offense. So Claypool, I've got my question marks about Big Ben. Juju's there, Deontay Johnson's there. Chase Claypool's probably not going to lead that team in targets still. But at the end of the day, I think that size is going to get him more looks than Brandon Cooks will see down there in the red zone. And even in a PPR league, Chase Claypool, despite the target competition, is still a guy I could see with a couple double-digit reception performances. I'll go peek back at the running back group here. It looks like I've got some time that I should probably wait before I go out there and aggressively invest into the running back market again. I might go with a fourth receiver here. There's still names out there on the board. I like a Rashad Bateman at this point. I think that, Marquise Brown's up here, but I think Bateman by the end of the season will be more productive than him. Tyler Boyd, I loved him as a high floor wide receiver too in 2020, but like I talked about with Higgins, adding in Chase to that offense makes things a bit more shaky, and you have to distribute those targets all over again. So I'm going to second guess that one there. Davis could be underrated. He could be a sleeper for the Jets this season. I'm going to dip into the market here and probably do what some people might think is a reach, but I'm going to take the high upside play in Rashad Bateman here. Maybe he gets off to a slow start. Maybe he doesn't produce day one, but the Ravens need a number one wide receiver, and they need a player they can count on to run solid routes, to be a good football player, and to just be dependable for Lamar Jackson, because he has not had that to this point in his career. Bateman is one of the most complete receivers in this draft class coming in day one. I think he's one of the most pro-ready players, and so I think that he'll get out there and he'll produce very early. So go get yourself some Rashad Bateman in the mid-rounds of your fantasy drafts this year. I think it'll pay off quite well for you on the back end. I'm a bit surprised to see Trey Sermon is ahead in ADP right now of Mike Davis. I know that Sermon's got some high-end potential on the back end of the season, but he's not walking in day one as a starter. I kind of like it, though. I'm not going to lie. I've been talking about him a lot in my videos lately as a player that can come out there and kind of shock some leagues and some lineups, and I like to see Hawkins getting up here as well as a potential sleeper that I have coming up in a rookie profile over on sizzlefantasy.com, where I'll be breaking down his fantasy and his dynasty situation for the foreseeable future here in the NFL. He's one of the only pure running backs on that Falcons roster behind Mike Davis, and if something were to happen to him, I think Hawkins might be next up in line to get some touches there and potentially be, you never know, but maybe the James Robinson of this draft class. So there's a lot of names to take a look at there. Go check that out if you're interested in one of our draft guide collections. You can get yourself the season-long or the rookie dynasty bundle, and we're one of the most affordable fantasy football draft guide providers out there right now. We try and keep things $10 or less. If you buy the bundle, it's a little bit more, but you're getting a discount. So it's $14.99 for that bundle, but you're getting yourself the redraft and the rookie dynasty bundle for a discounted price. So it's a really good stuff out there. I'd highly encourage you to go check it out. We put hours, that is Eric and I, we put hours and hours into researching this stuff and getting the best content we have available out for you all. So make sure you go check that out. We'd really appreciate it. Now, I need to go back to my roster here. I toggled off of it for a second. I think I might dip into that running back market and go Trey Sermon here. So I've already got myself an established quarterback, and yes, I am. I've talked about Trey Sermon as a league-winning player over the last week or so here. This is a guy who's going to come in. Raheem Mostert's probably not going to be readily available for the entire season because it's just been the trend for him historically to see nagging injuries, to get banged up and whatnot. So I expect Trey Sermon to get out there, and nearly every running back that finds himself in a starting role in Kyle Shanahan's offense finds great success. And for a young guy with fresh legs, I think he's going to eat that up, and he is going to use the living heck out of him. So Trey Sermon's going to be a player I think will have multiple 20-touch performances this season, probably go north of 100 scrimmage yards multiple times as well, and get himself in the end zone, because he always finds a way as well to get running backs 3+ touchdowns on a game. So perfectly the way things played out here. Mike Davis falls right into my lap at the end of the 10th round. I'll go out there, and that pretty much caps off this running back group. I've got 4 really strong players. Mike Davis will play that role where he can be my third running back. I can sub him in and out whenever I need him. This is a PPR league, so there's a little bit higher of a wide receiver emphasis. Not by much, but you should still keep that in mind when you're drafting your teams. Is that if Saquon Barkley or Cam Akers aren't available to play one week, maybe it's their bye week or something, maybe they don't have a good matchup, plug in Mike Davis for the Falcons. He'll be a solid RB2. He'll probably just be an average player, but he'll be a solid RB2 performer, and he'll give you just enough numbers that you need to, at the end of the day, make ends meet. So Mike Davis is a player this late in the draft. He's got great value, so go out there and snatch him up. It'll be worth your draft investment. I think I'm going to go out here and take another quarterback, or at least that's what is immediately popping off the screen to me. I really love going Ryan Tannehill. Matt Ryan's got himself a nice situation, but Julio is probably going to be on the move here sooner rather than later, so maybe best not to invest into an immobile old quarterback who, let's face it, is kind of a sack dummy, and I don't want to get myself in a situation where my quarterback's getting murdered all the time. So that might mess with our fantasy availability here. I'm going to go out and get Ryan Tannehill. I think this is a solid spot to go out and get Tannehill at, because this is a player who is an underrated rusher. He's mobile. He can scramble around the pocket, but that Titans defense is miserable. He's going to have to throw to keep up in football games. They want to run the ball with Derrick Henry. They want to be a smash mouth football team, and they can be until they start trailing in games, which inevitably will happen because this defense is going to struggle to get stops. in which case they're going to have to start throwing the rock. And A.J. Brown's a pretty good option to sling the ball too, and he doesn't have much else to work with, but he has enough where last season he was still throwing it to guys who I'd never heard of before prior to that season, including Anthony Ferkser, who's another one of my sleepers that I think could be a really nice piece as a late round tight end flyer this year. So go check out Ryan Tannehill. I think he'll give you some nice fantasy upside here as a player who might be in a more pass-happy offense than we would expect for this coming season. There's still some nice receivers out here. I would like to take an Elijah Moore, but him and Jamison Crowder playing that same undersized slot role concerns me a little bit for redraft at least. I'm still all in on Elijah Moore in Dynasty, but the fact that their most productive receiver for the last 2 years also plays a very similar position is a bit worrying to me. Nonetheless, maybe Marvin Jones going with a mature receiver who has gotten it done in 2 other locations, playing with Trevor Lawrence, one of the most talented players in this draft class. That could be a nice fantasy situation as my wide receiver 5 on this roster. I'm filling out bench spots right now. I'm looking for really good depth, really solid players that I can count on in a bye. And you know what? Yeah, that is where I'm going to go. Marvin Jones, maybe he'll miss a couple games. It seems to happen on a regular basis, but that's fine. When he's out there, he's a very, very darn good producer. For the Lions last year, when he had to step up into that wide receiver 1 role, when Kenny Golladay went down, he did just fine. He was very productive, and he lived up to his name of the Viking Killer. He, time and time again, every season, will find a way to scorch those guys and put up a massive stat line. So right now I'm just trying to find some veteran wide receivers that I can plug into my flex position on a weekly basis here and just find some value out of. So with that being said, there's still a lot of names I like here. There's some rookie fever going on with some of these guys having elevated ADPs. But then back at the end of the 13th round, we're going to go Nelson Aguilar. I think he's seeing a slight increase in his draft stock right now. But still, this is the best receiver from a talent perspective on the Pats roster probably at the moment, and that's not saying much, but he was still the best on the Raiders roster last season, and for a guy who barely found his way near 50 catches, he was still very fantasy productive and was very efficient with his catches. He scored a decent amount of touchdowns, but he was just explosive enough with the touches he was given to be good enough in fantasy to be a starting level player. So I like snatching him up here as a value pick late in this draft with plenty other options available. Cole Beasley was one of my favorite waiver wire stashes last season. He was a very productive receiver. Wow. He's a very productive receiver that I often started in my first or second flex position last year in my 2 flex leagues. And he would come out there and he would have some 10, 11, 12 catch performances. He'd give me some touchdowns. He went north of 100 yards a couple times. So he was one of my favorite steals last year off the waiver wire, and he was a really productive guy for me. So I considered him here. I saw another name that I was interested in. If I could find him again, that'd be nice. So ADP is telling me to wait a long time on Tevin Coleman here, but at this spot, we're looking at an RB5, a starting level player to kick the season off. I can get some trade bait, some capital out of him here by taking him at this spot. There's not going to be any other running backs sticking around at this point that are going to be day 1 starters barring injury and training camp. So I think it's unfair to Tevin Coleman to not pick him here. Yes, he has had injury concerns in the past. Yes, he's gotten dinged up. He rarely plays a full season. He's not the long-term answer there in New York, but I'd say he has a good 6 to 8 weeks at the start of the season, so if he puts up some nice stat lines, he's absolutely going to be a player you see on my must-sell list at the start of the season for my trade advice videos, but it doesn't matter. In the 14th round, if I can get a starting level player that I can flip and turn for another starting level player in my actual lineup elsewhere, it's too valuable to pass on, so it's worth the risk or at least the overdraft there, in my opinion. Another guy I really like taking here, Ramondre Stevenson, the exact opposite case of a Tevin Coleman. I think he comes in there, finds himself a role in that committee-style offense, and turns into a sledgehammer on the goal line. But I think it's a bit too early to take him. I like the idea, again, of a Denzel Mims here. There are some very solid players at this spot. Only 3 rounds left in this mock. I could probably take a second tight end. but that's not something I think is absolutely necessary, especially when we have a tight end 4 last season and TJ Hawkinson on this roster, and a player who I think that will once again finish in the top 5 this season. That makes that a little bit less urgent of a need. Let's check out the flex spots here. Yeah, a lot of tight ends, but like I said, I don't think that's exactly the right move here. So I'll go with a Denzel Mims. And Mims is a player, second-round pick in 2020. He's a bit of a leaner but also longer-framed receiver that'll play on the outside for the Jets here. And who knows? This is a flyer here late in the 15th round. He might have something. He might have some upside. Last year he averaged like 15 or 17 yards a catch. He didn't really get many receptions. He didn't see much volume. He struggled in that offense, and he honestly didn't get really rolling in year 1. But with a new quarterback, a guy who likes to get out of the pocket and make plays downfield, Mims could be a player that we see pop and have maybe a high-end wide receiver 2 role this season. So alongside Corey Davis, Jamison Crowder, Elijah Moore, it's a bit of a crammed receiving room. But I still think it's one he can be very productive in. So it's worth the risk for me. I need to pick a defense here before it's too late. We've only got 1 round left. I can go out here in the 16th, late 16th, and pick the best defense available in the Washington football team, which I think is a lethal pass rush and a good investment. But we'll try and squeak value out of one guy, assuming that we have a mid-17th round pick. So we'll be able to get out of that with a fine player. Might as well invest into that while we have the chance. I'm not loving these old receiver names. There's a lot of rookie fever going on here still. I think that some players are being valued a little bit higher than they should be for a redraft league. But nonetheless, these are still some decent players at the very least. I could take a third quarterback, but I don't know if that's the move here. You know what? I'll stick with what I was talking about earlier. I don't know if it's... I'm stumped. So, all right. So I'm going to decide here between my tight end 2 on this team of either Eric Ebron or the man himself, Anthony Firkser. Just because I want to talk about him a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and take Anthony Firkser just so I can kind of hype this man up a tad here. So that's Adam Troutman, excuse me. Anthony Firkser is a player who had some head-turning games last season. He had some productive performances, and he was actually quite impressive for a short stretch of time. So essentially what happened was Jonnu Smith was just not being utilized in the offense for a couple of weeks. I can't remember if he got injured or if he was just kind of quiet in a no-show, but Firkser is now the starting tight end. Jonnu Smith is out of there. If you recall last season, or if you're new around here, I'll fill you in quickly. Jonnu Smith was one of the breakout tight ends last year. He had a really, really great season. He's a bit of an undersized tight end, as is Anthony Firkser, but he really excels in the receiving game, and he's a guy who, after the catch, does some pretty nice things. So Firkser is a player I think will come in, and they like to use, with Arthur Smith last year, a lot of tight end screen games and a lot of short passes to tight ends, especially using them down the red zone. So I think they'll continue to do that this year, even with Arthur Smith departed. I think that makes Firkser a nice sleeper pick here. And as a late pick here at the end of a draft with little to no risk, I think it's a smart move. And for whatever reason, Washington always falls to me from the defensive side of things. The Texans will even go before them in some cases. So that'll conclude today's mock draft. Those were my top 17 picks from the 1.5 position. Quick overview of my team again here. Those first few picks were pretty darn good if you ask me. Saquon Barkley, Cam Akers, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, Josh Allen, and TJ Hawkinson. And then we switched gears a little bit and went with some higher upside plays and Chase Claypool and Rashad Bateman. And then we also solidified that RB group with Trey Sermon and Mike Davis, and then added some bench depth down there as well. So thank you all so much for watching today's mock draft. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And remember, go down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on. But you should also go down in the comment section and let me know what draft pick you want to see next week. And if you have a specific preference or have a pick that you could really benefit from seeing me do here, make sure to put that down there, and I'll do my best to get that for you as well. So one more closing note here. We've got that Discord available for a limited time. That'll be free to everyone watching this video who goes over and joins that up. So I'll see you all next time. Thank you for stopping by today. Peace out.